All market moves in any liquid market can be accurately forecasted and predicted using one single price action pattern to rule them all. This is what we call the master pattern. So what is the master pattern? The master pattern is a trading methodology developed by Trade ATS based on the laws of supply and demand, pain and pleasure theory, and mixed with institutional accumulation and distribution theory. So it's all these things rolled up into one. The master pattern is our interpretation and implementation of time-tested principles and observations. Now, before I move on, I want to give credit where credit's due. I did not fully invent this methodology. This comes from, again, time-tested observations from traders like Richard Wyckoff and Jesse Livermore from way back in the olden days, all the way up to traders that I admire now, one of which being Martin Cole. Martin Cole is the first one that I saw that put this into a 3-market phase framework. So I want to thank him so much for his contribution to where I've come as a trader. And since then, I have expanded more and more on this methodology and added a lot of my own spin and observations to it as well. So that's where the master pattern comes in, and that's what I'm gonna be teaching you about throughout these lessons, is my interpretation and what I've added to that methodology that's really helped me and the people that I've worked with. Why is learning the master pattern important? It is the only methodology that gives a solid objectional basis to every single price movement in every liquid market. You could think of it as an unchanging framework that serves as a baseline to create profitable, consistent trading strategies from. So this framework or this market understanding is the baseline of which explains not only the market maker's perspective, the institutional's perspective, how they're going to make money, but it also explains how the retail trader or the dumb money mindset fits in with that game. It's an all-encompassing explanation for how to deal with the markets, and there's nothing else out there like it. So let's talk about the master pattern cycle and the 3 specific phases that happen within that cycle. Starting with phase number 1, we call this phase the contraction period. Inside that contraction, we also establish what we call fair market value. We're not going to get too deep into that right this moment, but you're going to be hearing a lot about fair market value going forward. So the contraction is identified as simultaneous lower highs and higher lows at the same time, which is a contracting of a price range. When contraction takes place, this represents a balance of supply and demand and an agreement of fair market value between buyers and sellers. The second phase of the master pattern cycle is what we call the expansion phase. Now, the expansion starts the moment price breaks out of contraction. That's how it's classified. You have that box, you have that contraction period. The moment you leave that, you are in the expansion phase. The expansion phase is characterized by whipsaw-like action, pivoting back and forth above and below the contraction high and low points. A confirmed expansion must have at least 2 legs that have broken the high and low points of the preceding contraction range. So it must have that red 1 and 2 breaking through the high and low, or the low and high of the box, depending on the direction, doesn't really matter, but it must have that whipsaw-like action in order to be classified as a full-blown expansion point. And the third phase is the phase that we are all after. It's the most profitable phase, which is the trend. The trend is identified as the price movement between the previous contraction point and a new contraction point established at higher or lower prices. So thinking about those 3 market phases, remember you have the contraction, you have the expansion, and then you have the trend either to lower or higher prices, and then it starts all over again. We'll see that the market goes back into contraction, we establish new fair market value, and process starts all over again. This is the overview of the master pattern. This is the basic framework that you're going to be looking for in the live market as you go about trying to figure out what the story is and how you should be trading. So let's briefly take a look at what the master pattern looks like on top of actual candlesticks. This is using our software to identify the 3 market phases. Keep in mind that you do not need our software to do this. You could do everything you're going to learn in this course. You can map it on your chart manually. So keep that in mind. We do not need to sell you anything, and you don't need to buy anything. So phase number 1, we can see our contraction phase is drawn right here with a box on top of it. That's how we identify the contraction. Then we see the expansion phase. As it leaves that box, it whips back and forth, breaking the low and high of the box. That puts in our what we call our expansion line. You could also see that it says value or center of gravity there. That's that all-important pivot point established by fair market value, a very important price level. And then as we get up through there, we have our trend phase, that third phase, and then you can see that it goes back into contraction and then starts the 1, 2, 3 phase cycle all over again. So this is generally what you're going to be looking for when you're looking at your charts, but we'll expand on this much deeper. One of the biggest benefits to learning the master pattern strategy is that you get to defeat the number one enemy in trading, which is the desire to change. I want you to think about something for a second. Why are you watching this video? Are you a little bit curious about what I'm talking about? Why are you curious? I'll tell you why. It's because you're not totally sold on the strategy that you've been implementing up until this point. You probably have some winning periods, but then you probably go through some massive drawdowns and you're trying to figure out, is there something better out there? Am I just one indicator away from making this work? One little tweak to my risk management strategy, one little setting on the EA that I need to tweak. Whatever it is, that's why you're here. And when you learn the master pattern framework, all of that stops because you can never see the market any other way. You start to know the truth of what's happening behind the scenes. So changing comes in the form of changing indicators, changing systems, changing markets, changing timeframes. Every single time you change one of these things, you have to relearn some aspect of your strategy and your implementation, which causes you to start over to some degree, making your journey as a trader to profitability take longer and longer and longer. What I've come to understand over the last 12 years of being in this business is that in order to make it, you really need to be great. And in order to be great at anything, you need to specialize. And that is especially true when it comes to trading financial markets. So again, every time you change anything, you have to learn a new game. I've been using this analogy over the last year or so with some of my students, and I've noticed that it's really helped them get their head around what constant change does to a trader's effectiveness. So imagine for a moment that instead of trying to become a great trader, you were trying to become a great tennis player. What's the first thing that you would start doing? Well, it would probably be practicing. So starting Monday, you go to your local tennis courts and you start playing against some sort of opponent, trying to brush up your skill, trying to get your strategy and your approach down. Your side of the tennis court, this is a traditionally shaped tennis court that we would all recognize. You have the net in the middle, rectangular boundaries. Your side's on the top. And so you spend all day Monday trying to figure out the court, figure out your strategy, and you're playing against your opponent who's doing the same thing, right? So, but imagine that you spend all day Monday playing on this court, and then you come in on Tuesday and you're told that you're playing on this court and you have to stay on the same side, which is the top, and your opponent's going to stay on the bottom side, but your side looks like this. Well, how would you feel? You're like, well, that's not very fair. Now I have to learn new boundaries of this new court shape. My opponent doesn't have to do that, but okay, fine. I'll get over it. So you start working with these new boundaries. Okay, so you work on that all day Tuesday. You come in Wednesday. Now your side looks like this. Again, your opponent's side stays the same. You got to relearn these new boundaries that seem to be getting harder and harder. Okay, all day Wednesday you work on that court. Thursday you come in. Now your side looks like this. Opponent's is the same. Starting over again. You come in on Friday. Now your side looks like this. Again, opponent's side stays the same. So what does this have to do with you as a trader? Well, the facts are is that you are the one that is changing the shape of your own court. You're the one that's making it where you have to relearn the game every day. And your opponents are not. The banks don't change. The market makers don't change. They have the same strategy over and over and over again. 95% of the traders that you are up against are unwilling to stick to the same strategy and become great. And that is going to be their ultimate ruin. The fact that you are willing to stay here and get great at the same methodology means that your court is not going to change. You're going to be on the opponent's side, building on your progress every single day because you're looking at it through the same framework, through the same lens, so that you can truly become great at that methodology. The banks aren't changing their methodology. The market makers aren't changing their methodology because their methodology works. So when you get great at their methodology and stop changing, you could start to compete on that high level. So as we wrap up this lesson, what's the takeaway? Price is always in one of the three master pattern phases, whether it be contraction, expansion, or trend. Every single candle can be classified as part of one of those three phases. When you understand the master pattern cycle and its three phases, you can anticipate the phases and interact with them in a profitable and sustainable way. And your ability over time to identify each phase accurately will determine your overall win rate.